All right, good morning, everyone. My pleasure to call this special meeting to order for Fire Commissioners, South King Fire, December 2nd, 2023. All commissioners are present except for Commissioner Fuller, who has an excused absence. Commissioner Benito, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Benito, any comments?
Nothing for me.
Mr. Townsend? Mr. Boozer?
Mr. Chairman, again, as I said last night, since we're virtual as well this morning, I wanted to thank our staff for the tremendous amount of support that we had, Lori Perry and Mary as well, in supporting us through this process, and also our recruitment firm, particularly Mike Letcher, who led us through this process and attracted some outstanding candidates to the competition. Thank you very much.
All right, I agree with everything. All right, we're ready for the first candidate. Morning, Joe. Can you hear me? Hey guys, so I'm turning it on. Good morning.
Morning. Mind a shake?
Okay, we're going to, I don't know how much Mary Stevens told you, but we're going to give each candidate a half an hour.
Okay.
And we'd like to thank you, first of all, for participating in this important interview process for us. Start off with, why don't you take a couple minutes and tell us and the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. First, I want to thank you again. It was a pleasure to meet with you yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't get to spend as much time as I would have liked. It was kind of a challenge for me to balance the time with so many people in the room, but I welcome the opportunity to talk one-on-one with you. And so in brief, I kind of break my life down into what I'll call like the 5 F's. So the first is kind of faith is where I'm really grounded. That guides me kind of in what I do. And that's really my mission has always been to try to help others. And that really what drives me. Family is kind of the second piece. And the second piece with that is related to my family. My 2 daughters, I've got one that's 21 and one that's 24. And then my wife sells drugs, but it's kind of legally. She's a pharmacist, so it's nothing nefarious there. And so they're really another element that keeps me grounded. and their service in the community and in my life also plays out with that. The fire service, it began for me in 1993, and I evolved from working as an EMT all the way through all the ranks of the fire service. Spent 20 years in the Tucson corridor, worked for a fire district. It's very similar to South King, a little bit larger in size. It's 10 stations, a couple hundred people. But it was really about community first. And that what kind of resonates with the motto essentially with South King as well, wanting to be involved with the community. I found myself in 2013 in January accepting a position for the fire chief's job in Georgetown, Texas. That was different. So when I worked in Tucson, that was a younger department. But going to Texas, it was an old department, 1881, a lot of traditions and a lot of history. And they were very good at their craft. But I found myself questioning why I was there the first few weeks, talking to the assistant chiefs and others. And they said, we want you. We need you. And so coming into that organization, it wasn't something where it needed to be changed. They were 140 years old. They didn't need a new guy to come in and tell them what to do. But what it did allow them is to have a fresh perspective. And then working with the department and others, we've had a wild ride over the last 10 years. A lot of different programs have been implemented, similar in size to what South King is. We have 7 stations, 1 multi-company, run 2 truck companies, fully integrated EMS model. We transitioned away from kind of a county-based model to our own, and was just based upon the politics and the needs of our community itself. With that, like I said, I come to this humbly, and it's not a matter that I'm going to be the guy that's going to know all the answers, but what I am wired to do is accept people to challenge me. And I like to challenge back, just in the sense of trying to figure out how we can do things differently. That's really what my mantra is, thinking differently with how we approach problems and people.
Good. Mark?
I will back up. I'm sorry.
What do you feel the role of
I think twofold, and I'm going to put it in a technical term and a practical term. So first, it's leadership and management. And leadership in the sense of inspiring people and the community behind a certain vision that's appropriate for that area. And then it's the management of the necessary resources and keeping people on track with that vision and that mission. Equally, I think that we call it a fire chief, which is synonymous with leading, but it's really about people. It's through that inspiration of the heart and really trying to understand, and in the end, really caring and knowing about each member of the organization, as well as the community, which continues to evolve. And then the last piece I would say is that it is a commitment to oneself to not come in and necessarily feel like you're the change agent for the organization. You have to be willing to change yourself, but you have to get everyone else comfortable with that change, because the fire service, with all the different responsibilities, continues to evolve year after year after year. So.
For the benefit of the audience that may not have met you last night, this is John Sullivan,
Oh, I'm sorry.
our candidate. John Sullivan. With it being virtual, you don't know who's behind you, so to speak. They're up on the screen.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, John, I'd like to ask you what you feel your personal biggest challenge is as a leader.
I think the biggest challenge and opportunity is almost one and the same, and that is to be introspective and avoid assumptions. And over my time, I've been in the service for about 31 years now, I've become much more comfortable being wrong. And I think I said this to you during the last meeting, because I truly believe it. When I'm wrong, I know I've learned something. I'm very wary of situations where either I think I know the answer, or people around me all are espousing the same response, because that's where we may not be open to a more outward view of how things are, and that's where groupthink can take place.
Thank you.
Okay. What is your experience with JLM, which is Joint Labor Management Relationships, and how do you plan on creating a sustainable, productive relationship?
Well, my familiarity with that is throughout my entire career. It just was named differently. When I worked in Arizona, we ran it under the term of relationships by objectives. It was contract based, and as the name would imply, relationships, identifying problems, not being afraid of calling out the losses, because quite frankly, that's really where relations go bad, is when one is not willing to really identify what the biggest loss is for the individual involved in the discussions. And then likewise, when you hit an impasse, it's the ability to identify areas where there's common grounds. And so that's the relationships by objective piece, is one, not being afraid to call out the elephant in the room. And the second is having the vulnerability to go ahead and identify where there's common grounds to be done. When I work now currently in the state of Texas, we use the term labor management team. And it's interesting, actually, a few months ago, I had our group together and I asked, are we going to continue to call this labor management team, labor and management team? Because there's some certain nuances to that. And really what I was getting towards was it's the joint ownership of leading this organization, respecting each other's roles in the department and in the community. So I guess that would be it, unless there's some follow-ups you have, ma'am.
Describe what approaches you have used to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in your department and the results.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I think it's just being mindful. One is you can have statistics, and the statistics will speak to the importance of the department being a reflection of the community. And that's a good back of the napkin analysis to identify, are we being effective in targeting the different groups underrepresented in the department and in the community. Historically, women are underrepresented in the department and in the nation. Most workforces have anywhere from 7 to 10 if they're on the good side with women in the workforce. And I think it's being intentional to understand what those barriers are. Same thing with other members of minority groups, whether it be, and that changes from community to community. Some specific tacks that we've taken in our department. One, we had a large underrepresentation of women, and really the implementation of single role paramedic positions in our department is what really helped to move that needle. Also the engagement with the high schools and identifying that the health science programs were largely women-based, and then they also had more minorities in them as well. And so making that transition really allowed us to open up a new recruitment pool itself. The other is identifying how you're doing your tests and your barriers and your outreach and working through different technical colleges and schools and things, just better selling really the broad opportunities within a department. It could be a firefighter position, it could be a medical position, it could be a logistics position, it could be a variety of support related positions. And it's really helping to tap that one individual. Lastly, I'll speak to just our proximity to one of the larger Army military installations in the country that lends itself to natural transition each year. The average service member transitions every 4 years, so we work actively with bringing in transitioning soldiers, and that really helps also move the needle on that. And then as far as retaining it, it's one thing to bring people in. The retention part is also ensuring that there is that mindset within the organization. And so we have 2 programs, and I help facilitate those. One is developing, implementing an outward mindset, and that's really more holistic, not only on DEI, but it's also working through collusions and other related issues and biases that we have. And the other one is called outward inclusion, and that's where one of the phrases that I like to use is headwinds and tailwinds. It's understanding when we have a tailwind behind us in our life, and we also know when we have headwinds, but to put it on a specific thing rather than addressing the entire individual that may have a disability, they may have a different socioeconomic background, a variety of things. It's really understanding that in totality.
Turn my microphone on. Community risk reduction seems to be the future path in the fire service. What's your vision for community risk reduction? And please provide some examples of what you've implemented.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, that's a newer buzzword. It's been around for a little bit. I had the opportunity to work with John Stouffer, who actually was the gentleman who authored the Vision 2020. He and I did some consulting work together And so my familiarity working with him was working with different cities across the country, implementing community risk assessments and things like that. As far as our own department is concerned, we've already completed our standards of cover and the community risk reduction piece. We have a division that's a subsect of our fire and life safety division. Again, I'll start first with that. Used to be called Fire Marshal's Office. Over the years, we've evolved, and this is when I was in Tucson already, we evolved it to Fire and Life Safety, and then Fire and Life Safety has then further evolved to have a subsect, and that's really the community risk reduction. Each community is a little bit different, but when you do a community risk assessment in the community, identifying the hazards and then putting a specific probability, consequence, and impact associated with it, you can better understand where your opportunities and your challenges are, where your strengths are as an organization. The community I currently serve, it's not something that's really put out there in the newspapers a lot, but trauma-related calls happen frequently. It's not people being shot that happens, it's people falling. I mentioned this when we last spoke, that fall-related injuries, it doesn't matter what community you're in, what country you're in, those continue to be the leading indicators for hospital admits as people get older. And so we've implemented things in our medical system to do what's called the Beers list, and that's identifying prescriptions that cross-react with one another and increases one's risk of fall. We do fire prevention. We have the only program in the county for the juvenile fire setters program and things like that. We do preparedness for a whole host of things. I mean, we're already preparing for the eclipse that's coming in April. So we've got lots of planning with that because that's a real deal. It's a 4-minute thing, but it can really disrupt an organization. So it's having that awareness on community risk and the impacts to the organization.
That's the questions that we had for this morning session. Except, I guess we would ask at this point, is there anything else that you'd like to say or add before we conclude this part of it?
No, I don't. Just an apology again for not spending what I felt was sufficient time. I appreciate you being there last night, but it didn't seem like we got to spend a lot of time together to actually talk. I'd welcome that opportunity. I would also say that, I mean this humbly, you've got some great candidates here. This is something where I don't envy the position you're in, but I also am saying that I'm comfortable with whatever decision you want. I'm in a very good position right now. I'm not running from anything. What I'm wired to do as an individual is run towards problems and situations. And it's not that this is a problem in a situation. It's a unique opportunity for me to be part of something. And as a leader, I'm not a person that is going to come in and expect change across the entire organization. What I'm going to be doing is the one who's making myself vulnerable and allowing myself to change as the rest of the organization changes, because that's how it takes in order to make lasting change in an organization and in a community.
John, I've got a follow-up question.
Sure.
You mentioned on the risk reduction that you had worked with a consulting firm in other cities. Was that when you were in your current position in Texas?
Yes, sir.
So how did you carve out the time to do that? What impact did that have on your job? Was it something you did just on weekends and nights? Tell us more about that. And are you still in that capacity? And if you were selected by the board to lead our department, would you continue doing that?
Thank you for the question. And the answer is yes and no, but I'll put some meat behind what you just said, because you answered pretty much how it played out. I did have the consulting work that I did while working in Texas. It was endorsed by the city manager. The police chief also went around and they did part of a Valor program and things like this. Mine was tied to emergency service consulting. I was one of the individuals that was brought on board. You'll see in my email address, it says John@RethinkLGS. That was my own LLC that I set up, and I was just a subset of them doing consulting work, working on community risk reductions, standards of cover, and things like that. I also work with a firm out of Oregon called Levram, and we would do data analytics, and we'd go out and we'd better identify not only risks, but also deployment modeling for departments. I did that because I don't have hobbies. I don't turn wrenches on cars, and I don't bake, because my daughter knows how to bake pretty well. So really my hobby at home was, because I've got older children, my wife works, where I just like getting down and dirty and learning more about other organizations, because that also helped me as an organization having familiarity what was going on. Much like someone who's involved with accreditation, visiting other departments across the country really gives you visibility into best practices. I stopped doing the consulting work right at actually I finished it probably 4 or 5 months into COVID, because that's where it just really started to show the challenges we were having in the organization. And I have not done any consulting since since probably summer of 2020.
Any other follow-up questions?
I think this has been eaten the whole time we've been doing it. Please describe your management style.
Okay.
And your approach to identify problems and solve.
My management style is, and the follow-up to that was again, management style and my
Your approach to identify.
So I'm going to first work with identifying problems. That's going to play into then the management style itself. So identifying problems goes back to first and foremost the communication, and it's going into the organization, and it takes a period of time to establish that level of trust where folks feel comfortable in sharing what's working and what's not working in the organization. If there's a fear of failure, a fear of retribution, you're not going to get the information. It's more the ostrich effect where people are going to be burying their heads in the sand. One of the turning points for me in the organization, because I'd been there probably at this point 7 years, and I could say it all I want. If you're not trying, if you're not failing, you're either not trying or you're hiding something. But you could say that over and over again, but they still had that fear. And until we were very intentional, and this is where we deployed the developing and implementing an outward mindset, getting the folks to understand. We work actually through modeling, showing how to break up a collusion, how to work through problem solving, things like this. That's where they became more vulnerable. That's where it's very intentional in the different meetings. When I'm meeting with labor, it starts off, what are the safety issues? What are the rumors? Rumors are important because you have to call those out early. I have a weekly email that goes out. I encourage people, send me what your rumor or what is so I can address it. We're not going to hide behind things. And I think that speaks to being able to, one, identify the problem. The second is to commonly define the problem, and that's sometimes the challenge, because if you have in a department like yours where you've got 4 different shifts, 7 stations, 28 different definitions of a problem, that's a problem in and of itself. So let's agree to what the problem is. Let's identify what the losses are for the individual stakeholders, and from there, then identify areas where we have common ground, and then start building from that. And then the management piece goes back to holding everyone accountable for what we agreed on as far as a definition, and or if we need to move the goalposts or move the definition, it's an agreement with everyone understanding that it's not being done because this person has a relationship with this person or this happens. You take away all that ambiguity and you really stick to the facts as far as the managing piece. And then the accountability, just as a matter of if somebody doesn't follow through, understand why, and then try to set them up for success the next time, and really understanding what the contributing or correlating factors are. And I could go on and on. There's problem solving, accountability, all that stuff plays into this, but it's really engaging the workforce and the people that you're working with and understanding their perspective and sharing your perspective. But I also say, this is important, me being new to the organization, I'm not going to be the new guy with all the answers, and not the person that's going to come in and be able to solve everything. And sometimes people have that expectation, this person's here to fix it. It's not fair for me to give you, these are my problems, fix it. No, what's fair is me to take these problems, understand these problems, and then we collectively try to figure out how we're going to address them. Team approach, yes, sir.
Mark, can I just ask a quick follow-up? You've told us now twice about this IBB type approach that you called it relationships by objectives.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think you said in your resume questionnaire that it's similar to interest-based bargaining.
Okay.
I understand what interest-based bargaining is, but I don't think any of us understand what relationships by objectives. Tell us more about the techniques and tools used. And this was in Arizona, right, John?
Yeah. Well, it's
Tell us
also
more about what are the fundamentals in this program, or what to call it, approach to labor relations. We understand it.
Sure. There's a formal process
And,
that's
and
in
related,
place.
related to your management style.
Okay.
You talk about that in Arizona, but do you carry that over to your current position as chief?
Sure.
So tell us about that.
So there's acronyms. Interest-based bargaining is a term I'm familiar with. They use that term in Texas as well. We softened the language when I was in Arizona, calling it relationships. Interest can sometimes be thought of as self-interests, but all of us here are old enough to know before we had Spotify, we'd have a radio, and you turn in the radio station, and if I go to WIFM, what's in it for me? And that's all I'm focused on and listening. I'm just playing that music over and over in my head. That's my interest. I don't care about what you're interested in. If we're all listening to a different channel of what's in, you understand where I'm going? That's interest-based bargaining. And if we create a relationship where we're agreeing as a group, defining the problem that we're trying to tackle. And so it kind of goes holistic here. So I use terms almost synonymously. If it's interest-based bargaining, if it's labor management team negotiations, if it's developing and implementing an outward mindset and doing collective discussions. My management style is not assuming, being very careful that I assume and try to better understand what we're really tackling. Oftentimes, the interest or the issue that's trying to be solved has many layers beneath it. And there's all kinds of technical science behind it, but I try to keep it simple. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. It's a matter of really simplifying and asking that question a couple times. Why? Get a little bit deeper. Why? Is this really the issue? And you really start to try to tackle that sub issue first rather than just throwing some.
What are some of the techniques that are used in this relationship problem solving approach?
Well, it can't be done at the table itself. It has to precede the table. And that's where some of the techniques involve just a commitment to meet formally and informally. The contracts will typically say that you have to meet on a monthly basis or whatever you set at the cadence for it. And that's kind of that structure. And when you have gotchas, that doesn't help. My personal style was when I came to Arizona or came to Texas, I actually invited our association president at the time, Brad Cox, to come to the state level civil service meetings. He got barred from attending because they don't let labor in the room. And then they went on to just disparage labor and say how horrible they are and everything else. I was offended on their behalf being there because here's the thing is that there has to be an ability to actually talk through the issues. And I truly believe that. And so that's where we have our own commitment internally to where, yes, we formally meet the beginning of every month. We kind of have shared leadership and goals and responsibilities. To their credit, they understand the lane that they're supposed to be in. They respect the lane that I'm supposed to be in. And when there's ambiguity there, we talk through it. But then it's all the stuff that happens in between, giving one another situational awareness. Hey, this is coming down the pipeline. I'm going to put this on your radar. Hey, this is coming down the pipeline. Put this on your radar. And then we look for building common philosophies in leadership and also building that relationship within the department. And quite honestly, it can be hard for them too, because I can tell you that once they start to show that they understand management, then all of a sudden they become targets because sometimes an association can be the ones that all the members give them the problem, fix it, but they're not engaged to try to help solve the problems. And that can be one of the challenges. So unfortunately, I can't give you a recipe where it's a prescribed thing. Over my years, I found that the fundamental piece is understanding the individual, understanding their losses, committing, and not being the person who stamps their feet and walks away.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Look at my watch. I guess it's 8:30. So
Thank
you. It won't be good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim.
Good morning.
My mic on there?
Test. Okay, it is one.
Okay, our next candidate is Dominique Swinert. Welcome.
Thank you.
We'd like to, we've allotted about 30 minutes per candidate. Got some questions. We may or may not need that long. I'd like to start off by having you just take a few minutes and tell the audience and us just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you. Very nice to be here with you this morning. As the commissioner was saying, my name is Dominic Swinhart. Born and raised down in Grays Harbor, spent most of my firefighting line career in the Aberdeen Fire Department. About 20 years as a firefighter paramedic down there. And then eventually decided to move off into administration, worked out in the Midwest and South Dakota as a fire chief for a couple of years, and then came back to Washington, worked down in Clark County for 11 years, where I coordinated the service merger between the Camas and Washougal fire departments. And then for the last going on 2 years, I've been at the Key Peninsula Fire Department just down in Pierce County. It's sort of like a homecoming coming back to Pierce County because that's where I did my my formative years as a paramedic school, went to Tacoma Community College, rode with Tacoma Fire Department. And so it was kind of nice to get back to that area. I started in the fire service in 1989, so I guess next year I'm going to hit coming up on 35 years. Out of that time, I've been a fire chief for going on 15 years. And so I'm getting very close to a period of time where I will have been a fire chief longer than I was on the line. But it's been a incredibly rewarding career being able to provide back to the communities that I've lived in, and particularly my time down in Grays Harbor County where my family still is. And so that's pretty much my career in a nutshell. I also spent time as in Aberdeen as a IFF local president. I was also an elected official as a city councilman in my hometown. So I think what that did was it gave me a really diverse perspective on how we approach some of the challenges that we face in the fire service, not only from the labor perspective, but as an elected official perspective, and then now as a fire chief. So when I take on some of those challenges, it's kind of nice to have that background and be able to look at it from 3 different ways.
Good.
Hey, good morning. And what do you feel is the role of a fire chief?
Well, the fire chief has to set the vision and the direction for the agency, has to support the operations, and I think also has to be able to convey the vision of the elected officials, the board, to the line as well. So I think primarily what I always see myself as doing, as I have for the last many years, the fire chief, I'm the person who manages the finances, who oversees the budget, and then also directs operations. In some cases, I've had operations chiefs, so that takes a little bit of the load off that plate. But also in setting the vision, setting the direction of the agency and moving forward.
Nick, describe to us your biggest challenge that you feel you have as a leader.
Commissioner, in the past or currently?
Either or both?
I think as far as challenges in the past, I think the biggest challenge that I faced as a fire chief was in the merging of the Camas and Washougal fire departments. That was a process that had been tried 2 or 3 times before I got there and failed due to various reasons each of those times. And so trying to pull those various interests together, not only 2 separate city councils, 2 separate mayors, 2 separate city administrators, 2 separate labor groups, 2 separate fire departments, and trying to pull all those groups together for a common good for the community was a challenge. It wasn't an extraordinary challenge. I think a lot of the legwork was done before I got there, but that was probably the biggest challenge that I faced previously as a fire chief. And I would say as far as ongoing challenges, it's always a challenge to try to explain the limited finances that we have as either a fire district or a municipal district. It's a process of trying to educate our personnel to make sure they understand the limitations on revenue, where our taxes come from, how we can spend that. And so I always try to use those opportunities to educate, particularly new personnel, because I know when I was in the labor group, we always tended to think that the city had a secret pot of money that they were keeping somewhere. They just didn't want to give it to us. And And so when I became an elected official, and when I became a fire chief, I very quickly realized there's not an endless pot of money. There are limitations to what we can do and what we can spend on. And so try to use that knowledge to be able to translate that down to the frontline folks so that they know what our limitations are when it comes to staffing and apparatus and stations.
Follow up on that, on the merger with Camas and Washougal. Were those two city fire departments?
Yes, they were two separate city fire departments.
Yeah, but the cities didn't merge. They're just trying to.
Just the fire
merge the
departments.
fire department.
And so what it was, it eventually became a contract for service. And so Washougal just essentially signed over their personnel, their station, their equipment to us, and they became part of our budget under a 10-year contract for service. With the plan to eventually look toward an RFA, which has not quite got there yet.
So Nick, you said the previous attempt or attempts weren't successful. Why do you feel this attempt that you led was successful?
I think
What was the key or key?
I think the key, there were a couple keys. First of all, having the right elected officials on both sides. That was a huge part of it, because part of the recent failures where you'd have one council was not on board or the other council wasn't on board, or you had one mayor that wasn't supportive of the other mayor that wasn't. So the elected officials being lined up good, and the part that was in place before I got there, which I mentioned earlier, I think did a lot of the legwork, is before I got there, the labor groups decided to join together. And so when the labor groups decided to join one, that took away what is typically a huge hurdle with merging fire departments. So I was worried when I came in that I was going to have to deal with firefighters from different departments arguing or fisticuffs in front of the fire station or something like that. But that wasn't the case. They were already one labor group. They were already part of the same group. So that took a major hurdle out of my way even before I got there.
Beyond that you felt you added? In other words, you're saying those two things you really didn't do. The stage
Right.
was already set. Were there any techniques or an approach you used that was different than before as the fire chief?
I think that the thing that I probably provided most to the process was keeping the elected officials engaged in the process, because even though ultimately we found out that we had the perfect individuals on both sides, there was still a lot of attempts to pull away during that process. There was, if you know the area down there, there was a lot of people that didn't want to merge with the other city because doggone it, they beat us in the high school football game back in '75, and they still remembered that. And so it was a process of making sure that we kept those elected officials engaged and kept the eyes on the prize, which was pulling the departments together. So I like to say that a big part of that process was visiting with a lot of elected officials over that first couple of years to keep them all engaged in the process and to not pull apart like they had in the past.
So after you merge, each city continued to fund?
Yes, it was based on, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but the formula was based on a combination of population, call volume, and assessed valuation. And so they would feed this into an Excel spreadsheet basically, and what it worked out to was a 60-40 split. So Camas funded 60% of the fire department, Washougal funded 40% of the fire department, which was a great method to do in the beginning. Caused some problems a little bit later though, was when one city grew a lot faster than the other.
Mr. Chairman, do we have time for one more follow-up
Sure.
on the same thing? You didn't spend a lot of time talking about explaining limited revenue resources to firefighters. Can you elaborate a little bit more in terms of, what did you say? What are the techniques you used? What were you trying to achieve with that?
Well, and that's a good question, Commissioner. Now, one of the things that I did was sitting down, and this was when we were getting ready to start contract negotiations during 1 year down there, sitting down with the budget, sitting down with the entire municipal fire budget, and actually outlining what was truly discretionary out of, at that time, about a $16 million budget. And I found that when you take away salary and benefits and insurance and all these other things that we really don't have control over unless you want to cut people or apparatus or close stations, out of that $16 million budget, there was about 500,000 of it that was truly discretionary, that I considered discretionary to the fire chief. And so I think that was pretty illuminating to be able to sit down with the labor group and say, we've got a $16 million budget, but here's $500,000 that I actually have control over. And so I think it was just that simple process of explaining the budget process and actually how little we have control over.
Thank you.
Okay, what is your experience with JLM or joint labor management relationships, and how do you plan on creating a sustainable, productive relationship?
I think the key, so my experience with labor management has always been very good. Never have in, going on 15 years, never faced an arbitration. I've only ever faced 2 grievances, I think, during that period of time. And so I think a key part to that is that maintaining that open lines of communication is what people often would call an open door policy. But you've got to have a very open and collaborative process to that labor management relationship. We currently do, in my current department, we do what we call LMC, Labor Management Committee. We do LMC at least once a month. So I think in a department this size, you should probably, I think the chief should be doing LMC perhaps at least once every couple weeks to make sure we're staying in the loop on the issues that are important. And that's how you avoid things like ULPs and grievances, is always keeping those lines of communication open. The union presidents knowing that they can call me at home, they can text me, we can jump on those issues early. I always have a saying that if there's ever a grievance or a ULP that hits my desk that I wasn't expecting, we have a major breakdown in the communication process. And so I think that that is the key to making sure that those relationships are kept positive. And I think it's also worth mentioning that one of my philosophies in approaching the labor management relationship is, I think too often fire chiefs approach, and labor leaders as well, approach those relationships from thinking that there always has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. And I don't look at them that way. Now, sometimes in reality, there are people that sometimes do lose. But I think if you approach those discussions from a win-win perspective and knowing that you can both take something away from that process, I think it could be, helps build that positive relationship.
Describe what approaches you have used to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in your department and the results.
Well, I think that what we did down in Clark County was we varied where we were advertising for our positions, and we also changed up the process a little bit in how we, with the hiring process that we used, from the written to the interviews to the physical agility, because we still ran those all internally ourselves down there. And one of the things that we did is we modified some of the things in the physical agility test that I didn't think were relevant to what we actually did. And I think what that allowed us to do was to bring on more diverse people. We diversified or increased our diversity at that department during my time there by over 20%, and hiring more female firefighters, people of different races, people of different identities. And it's a process of recruitment, but it's also, once you start getting just a little bit of diversity, those people help you recruit more diversity into the department. So it's a lot of it is harnessing the people that you have to help increase that diversity moving forward. So I think that we experienced a real positive reaction to those changes.
A quick follow-up, what about the current department? I don't know how diverse, that community really is, but at least in terms of female, what have you been doing there?
And we've only had one hiring process since I've been there. And we hired we've hired 3 or 4 female firefighters just right before I got there. And then since I've been there, we've added another 2. So I think that we're not, the Key Peninsula is not necessarily the most diverse community out there, but I think it's in embracing that change has been positive for the department just in the short time I've been there.
Community risk reduction seems to be the future path in the fire service. What is your vision for community risk reduction, and provide some.
Well, and what we've done with and you're right, I do believe the community risk reduction as well as fire prevention is the future of what we do. It's how we engage with our communities more, decrease that repeat call volume that might necessarily not be needed. One of the things that we do, and this is not a program that I implemented, but out on the Key Peninsula, we have it's sort of like a CARES program where we have firefighters that will go out and do things like install wheelchair ramps, install handrails, those sorts of things to help decrease falls, decrease injuries in vulnerable populations. And that was something that was already going on before I got there, but we've continued to support and hopefully increase that engagement with the community. And I think things like that help, obviously, in a community like South King Fire as well. One of the things we did, and this was before I was a fire chief, but down in Grace Harbor, we had smoke detector programs, going out and installing smoke detectors in homes and things that weren't necessarily, for instance, some of them were in apartment buildings and vulnerable populations that where the landlord should have been providing them, but they weren't. And we would just go out and install them anyway because we knew it kept the community safer. And so I think those kind of programs are indeed what we're going to be seeing more of in the future. One of the programs that I've always been impressed with, it's not mine, it was from a neighboring organization, but I thought it's something we should aspire to someday, was they have a PA, they have a physician's assistant on staff on the payroll, and they actually have a medical clinic in their headquarters fire station. And what that does is it helps decrease some of those people from the community can actually come into the fire station and get examined by the PA, get a physical, get medications, get treated for illnesses right at the fire station. What that does is it decreases the call volume on some of those 911 that would otherwise be 911 calls. So that's something that I would like to see in my current department or some future department. I think that programs like that are very innovative. It's thinking outside the box. And I think that those are the sorts of things that we need to be seeing more of in the future.
Follow up to that, community risk reduction, who your vision would be, who would manage that program?
I think in a department that has the resources, I believe that you should have somebody dedicated to community risk reduction, whether it's a division chief position or some other level. I think that if you've got the budgetary capacity, it should be a specially identified position. If it can't be, then typically positions like that or job duties like that are assigned to fire prevention division. So that's typically where I would see it.
Okay, that's the questions, the extent of the questions that we had, except ask if there's anything else you'd like to say or add. Any follow-up questions? We've got a bunch of them.
Yep, I'll fire off another one here. Please describe your management style and process you.
So the leadership style that I like to think that I follow the most is situational leadership, and basically approaching how I engage with personnel depending on the person. I think everybody's different, and I don't think everybody should be dealt with the same leadership style. You might have new, younger firefighters that need a little bit more hands-on, a little bit more direct guidance. You have other personnel who are more self-starters, who don't need help with getting a program started the direction they go. You give them a project and you give them a little nudge and they off to the races and they take care of it. And you require almost no supervision because you know they're going to get the job done. Then you have others that you know are going to take a project on, but you're going to need check-ins with them to make sure that it's still going good, to see if there's anything more that you can provide to them. So when I approach those type of leadership situations, it depends on the person. But as far as how I approach problems, I think that comes down to or challenges. It comes back to what I said earlier, is that open communication, being able to sit down early to discuss challenges, understand where both or the parties are coming from, and then talk about how you're going to resolve it. And I think that that's the key to just about any challenge that we face in the fire service.
I know you said last night that you were on the state chiefs board
Yes.
at one time. How much are you still involved with them? I mean, obviously you're a member of that.
I was on the board of directors of the Washington Fire Chiefs for 4 years, representing Southwest Washington. And from 2014 to, let's see, 2016 to 2020, stepped down right when COVID happened. And so would like to get back involved with it again someday, but at the time when COVID happened, and as we all know, as challenging as that got, I didn't have time to be dealing with state chiefs meetings, but still involved with the board, some very close colleagues and friends still on the board, and it'd be nice to get back involved with that someday.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so, Commissioner. I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here and be able to visit with you folks.
Very good.
Thank you.
See you this afternoon. I've never run into a case where All right, start over. Okay, our next candidate is Patrick Reed, and what we're doing is allowing roughly 30 minutes to go through a few questions. Yeah, if we get through the questions early, then we'll use that time for follow-up questions. You want to add? Why don't we start by asking you to just spend a couple minutes telling the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I've been in the fire service career side over 33 years. I got interested in the fire service when I was 16 as a volunteer on the East Coast. Grew up in Pennsylvania. And yes, sir. Can you hear me better? Okay. Grew up in Pennsylvania. Started my career on the West Coast. Had the opportunity to go back and forth. Retired in 2012 as a fire chief of Fort Belvoir, Virginia. In that time, when I retired, I went out and was doing the honey-do list, and the honey-do list got done, and I was offered a limited contract to go to work for FEMA. Went to work for FEMA for a year, working in the National Integration Center, which is where the NIMS was originated from, and resource typing. So my project there as a project manager, managed about 250 people, was to develop resource typing for not only the fire service, but across the spectrum. After that was up, I was asked if I wanted to come back and work full time for them. And I was offered an opportunity to go to Utah with the Division of Emergency Management. We became a branch chief there, working in their response division. And part of my task was to stand up their IMT teams, type 3 IMT teams for the state, and then also work on their state SUSAR system, because they only had a FEMA type 1 rescue team, but it wasn't state deployable. So we worked with Unified Fire and got some regional concepts laid out. In that time, I was offered a position to go back to the fire service as a division chief of training for Fort Belvoir, for Fort Irwin, California, and I took that opportunity. Was there for 2 years, got that program straightened out for the Department of the Army so that they were on processes, had processes in place to certify their people in accordance with DoD requirements. From there, I was offered a position with the city of Yakima as their deputy chief of operations, took that position. And from there, I went to Pasco, where I was offered the deputy chief of logistics, training, and operations. And it was a good opportunity because I had the opportunity to build my own job description, because it was a new position that they had created, which in a career, you don't get to do that very often. Personally, a little bit about me. I'm married, been married for 33 years to my wife, Patty. Some of you met last night. We have 3 adult children who live in Harriman, Utah. 2 of them are going to college. 1 graduated from BYU. They work, 2 of them work for Intermountain Health. The other works for the University of Utah Hospital. They're going to school. My daughter wants to be a nurse. My son wants to be an engineer, but is now talking about the fire service. And then my daughter works in mental health for benefits for mental health along that lines. We have 4 dogs, 3 German Shepherds, and a poodle. So we rescued all of them from shelters. We've done that since our kids were born. We're on our 3rd generation of rescue dogs. We like to camp and travel. So that's who we are in a nutshell.
Good morning, Chief. What do you feel the role of a fire chief is?
I feel in the role of a fire chief is he's a facilitator. And what I mean by that, he facilitates for the elected officials, and he facilitates for the organization. And he or that position is the middle person, and they're the person that needs to negotiate for both sides, making sure that the needs of the community are met, as well as the needs of the organization are met. And I shouldn't say he, but the position of fire chief is also the one who facilitates the communication from all aspects, from top down, bottom up, and across the spectrum. So it goes back to that facilitation. They're also the one that is tasked with carrying out the mission of the organization And they have to do that collectively. And what I mean by collectively is that they have to do it with the elected approval. They also have to have the organizational buy-in and support. And that means that they have to be transparent and open and fluid in communication, both oral and verbal communication. Sure.
Thank you, Chief Patrick. Could you describe to us your biggest challenge as a leader? You can either do that in the past, present, or both of you.
Sure. One of my biggest challenges is in the past, and both going in with Yakima and then when I was the fire chief of Fort Belvoir, is getting organizational buy-in, because the fire service, it's a tradition-based organization. It's based on relationships. And a lot of times when you go in and you're introducing new ideas or new concepts, a lot of times it's change, and the fear of change it puts people on edge, and a lot of times puts that wall up. So one of the things that I've learned in that through these these challenges is that you have to understand the history and culture of an organization, and you can make change. Some organizations it's very fast, some organizations it's very slow, but it's done through understanding the history where we're at. And so that's been my challenge, is making sure that if I'm a change agent, is that I get the buy-in and use the buy-in, understanding the history, the culture, where we've been, the mistakes that have been made in the past. So you prevent doing that and get the buy-in of the organization. And additionally with that is stealing an old term that I think myself and most of the board will understand, is process action teams from the old total quality management concept. If you use that in conjunction with it'll help you to prevent those issues. And that's one thing that, again, it was a takeaway learning, that if you want buy-in, you need to utilize the people and understand them.
I think we have time. How about the current organization you're in? What's your biggest challenge there?
The biggest organization right now is we had a new chief that took over about 6 months ago, and he's been introducing a lot of change organizationally. And so it's one of the things is getting the organization to buy in. So I've had to be the mediator in the case and go out and explain to them why the changes are going on and so on like that. And part of the problem is that the chief has been so busy with other things that he hasn't been effective in communicating. So I've had to become the communicator. And how I've implemented that is basically every Friday I go out and have lunch with the station to open up those communication chains and answer their questions as best as I can. And there's things that I can answer, but I'll go back and get them the answers because it hasn't been communicated to me as well. And that's one of the biggest issues we're dealing with now. And it stems from lack of communication, Commissioner, is what it does.
Thank you.
I must admit, I'm not sure. Is Pasco a fire district, or are you a city department?
We're a city department, sir. Yeah, we're a city department. We have 104 strong in the organization. 4 stations currently. The 5th station will open in January, the end of January. So we'll have 5 stations.
Has Pasco made any attempts to merge with any other cities or districts?
No, there was, before I was there, and this is going back, there was an concept to start regionalization in the region, and there was some pros and cons to it, but it never panned out. And part of it deals with the cities are robust in their funding streams right now for the fire service, but it's the population growth. What happened is that Kennewick built up very quickly first. The city of Richland took off, and now Pasco, and we're keeping up with the growth through expanding the services within the city. The city is economically being able to do that throughout that. Now we do some combination things, and I apologize if I'm getting off. Our dispatch is regionalized. We do some regionalized training. We've done standards of coverage documents that are all regionalized and we've bought into, but we have not looked at consolidation or mergers, Commissioner.
Ask Bill,
Sure.
what's the combined population of the?
The combined for Franklin and Benton County, because they do it on is about 300,000. Pasco right now is about 90, 91, 92 strong. Projected growth rate is by 2030 will be between 150 and 200,000 people.
What is your experience with JLM or joint labor management relationships, and how do you plan on creating a sustainable, productive relationship?
So I've had a lot of experience over my career dealing with labor unions, negotiating contracts between, to date, I think I've negotiated or been involved with the negotiation between 9 and 10 contracts. I've always believed in, and we do work with a labor management partnership. And how we've gotten there and how I believe in that is that it's open and transparent communication. We're in a public eye, so nothing is really hitting from them. If they really want to look, they can find anything the labor union can. It's being honest with them, being frank with them, and conversely, we enter into a contract. That contract is dual. So my belief with that is you honor the contract. You try not to deviate from that contract. If there's ways to deviate it through agreements, memorandums of understanding, or along that lines, you honor if we do violate what they believe violating the contract, they have processes. You give them you give the labor union its due process and go through the grievance processes and work with them. Hopefully, if selected, my idea would be have open communication, regular labor management meetings, try to resolve everything at the lowest level, try to prevent those issues from turning up. If we have and it comes down to a trust bond. I believe in trust. You don't have to like me, but you have to trust me. And I have that philosophy. And if they trust me or the organization, they're willing to work with us. And I've always believed in trust is number one. And like I said earlier, if I don't know something, I'll get them an answer. If I can't tell them something because for whatever purposes you've given me direction not to, where we're working through some process, I'll tell them that too, and I'll be honest with them. So it comes down to communications and trust. And my goal would be to build that trust bond and create those management meetings, labor management meetings on a routine basis, and try to hold everything at the lowest level, and fair negotiations when contracts are due.
Hey, describe what approaches you have used to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in your department and the results.
So the city of Pasco is 51% Hispanic. In comparison, we're also 41% female within our organization. What we have done collectively is we've gone out and started looking at processes, and this is something I've done, is we've looked at recruitment. How can we recruit? We've gone as far as in the city of Pasco to bring people across to this side to recruit diversity, going to the UW and some of the colleges, going into actually communities. We have a huge Hispanic population and community in the sense that it's a development. It's primarily Hispanic. We've gone in there. The other thing we are doing is we are targeting junior high school students early. We're looking at going into them, letting them know the value of what the fire department brings as far as both economically and long-term, looking at retirement benefit packages, letting them understand what fire department or city government in general offers to them. We've diversified and spread our recruitment out. We kind of tag with our PD. The only place we haven't gone to recruit is Hawaii yet, but we've gone out. But diversity in our organization is very, very, in the city of Pasco, is very key because of our demographic makeup. So we are trying to do that. And we're about 25 to 28% Hispanic makeup of the organization. Where we lack right now is in our female population because of retirements recently. So we're only about 2% female. And so we're looking at when we, in our recruitment, which I'm involved with, that's part of my task, is I'm involved with all recruitments up to the rank of my deputy chief, and the chief is responsible for that. So we're looking at what we call informed target recruitment, meaning that we're looking to expand so that we can attract female firefighters or diversified female firefighters. As far as equality and inclusion, our organization is geared towards everybody has say, everybody is welcomed. I believe in that. I use this example, I have 2 daughters and a son, and I'm of the firm opinion that physically and mentally they can do everything equally. I also believe that people can do that. It's just you have to include them. You have to make sure they have that opportunity. We have that. We do not. We have a zero tolerance policy within the organization, and I follow that to a T from that perspective. And equality, everybody is equal in our organization. It doesn't matter rank or anything, and we ensure that everybody has fair say into the organization. Everybody has fair input into the organization, and we also make sure that everybody is welcomed in the organization. It doesn't matter gender, nationality, sexual preference. None of that plays a factor. It's you come in, you do your job. We have the working conditions are so that you can do your job. They're fair for everybody, and that's what I've done along that lines. And I don't tolerate. I have a zero tolerance because I have the vast majority of the workforce works under me, and they know that. Hopefully, I answered that question for you, Commissioner.
Just to follow up on that, Chief. So you were pretty specific about what you're doing in terms of outreach recruitment that's been at least partially successful to get a Hispanic component of the department closer to what the community is. And you said female is only 2%. What specifically is the department doing or the city doing to try to outreach to increase the percentage of females
Sure.
in the department?
So what we're doing is the city holistically is going towards I shouldn't say target, that's a bad word. We're going and we're to female groups, youth groups along that lines to start them into looking more specifically at all aspects of government, but we're looking at the fire department. One of the things that's helped us is we have a high school program that started, and up until recently, it was predominantly dominated by male participants. This year, it's about 50-50, and so we're using that as a target to go after the female audience and get them more involved with the organization. Additionally, when we recruit, we try to look at what we're getting as far as in our recruitment numbers. When we talk about equity, our organization looks at equity as far as if everybody's on the same playing field, then we're going to select the best recruits that we can from that perspective. That being said, the female recruits in the Tri-Tech high school program, they're outstanding right now, and we're hoping that we've lowered our age to 18 so we can start recruiting at that as they walk out the door, handing them recruitment. So, Commissioner, I hope I answered that question for you.
Is there an Explorer post?
There's not an Explorer post in the city. We've opted not to do that because what we do have is we have a lot of volunteer programs around us. The volunteer programs are the female firefighters are starting to pick up, and we're also targeting them in some respects to poach from the fire districts, the volunteer fire districts is what we're looking at. So how we're also doing some of our marketing is with the districts when we do training with them and tell them, hey, look, we're looking, we would like to have you apply. And we're starting to see some of that. It's, unfortunately, we're not, and I hope this doesn't sound wrong, we're not allowed to truly target recruit. And I think in some respects it's wrong, because if I can't make up the demographics of the community is going to look unfavorably at the organization from that perspective. So we try as doing it as correctly as we can, with emphasis saying that, hey, we're not here with this with this demographic of our community or that demographic of our community.
It has to be more qualitative than quantitative.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Chief, we got community risk reduction seems to be the future path of the fire service. What is your vision for community risk reduction? Please provide some examples of what department.
Sure. So we look at community risk reduction. We don't look at it as code enforcement. We look at it a little bit different. We look at community risk reduction almost like all targets, all hazard, all targets. So some of the things we've done is we've implemented going into our senior community to prevent slip, trips, and falls hazards, which is significant within our community. We've also taken our resource navigator, which is equivalent to your CARES program, and put that under our community risk reduction, because it is truly community risk reduction in that perspective. A lot of people say it's EMS. A lot of people say it falls under community risk reduction. We've put it under the community risk reduction format, because it's more than just running for EMS calls. It's going out and assisting the public so that they don't impact the 911 system. And that's part of it is education. Part of it is support network services, such as connecting people with proper medical care, proper health providers, and so on like that. Additionally, we're very active with our smoke detector program. We have routine years that we go within our aging population that we schedule them year after year after year out for their battery changes in October. So we have a clientele that we know every October we're going out and changing the batteries in their smoke detectors for them. We also know in that clientele that we have ones that we're going out and change their hardwire detection systems on that. So that's some of the community. We're also very big because we have a wildland urban interface problem. We've addressed that through WUI, looking at the wildland interface, 100-foot clearance around facilities and so on like that. And we're doing that education as well. Some of the other things that fall under our community risk reduction are hands-free CPR that we go out into the community, AED training that we go out into the community. We go out into the community with our safety trailer, and we hit the schools very hard and so on like that. In addition to that, we go out and we discuss with the schools addiction problems and substance abuse problems. We'll talk to the schools, go out and talk to the schools about driving, and talk to them about how speed and just speed alone has impacts on the community and them as individuals. So we've taken it not as just fire-based, but holistically. We do a biannual community risk reduction survey. And of that survey, what we do is we pick the 2 key problems that we find out, and we focus on that. In addition to that, it's we do all the standard open houses during fire prevention. We do community night out support with the PD. We work in conjunction with the PD on some of their efforts as well, to go out and help them. We also focus in our behavioral health issues fall under CRR when responding with our homeless homeless population. They fall under that in conjunction because it falls under our Resource Navigator program. So we've taken it to a different dimension of just looking at as fire prevention. We look at holistically as all hazards risk reduction.
Mark, I want to ask a follow-up to that. Chief, that's a lot of activities. Can you describe to us how it's organized, how it's led and managed, and what resources are allocated in the department to that activity?
Yes, sir. So what we do is we have one community risk reduction individual. We spread the work out. We have what we call support personnel, which are people off the floor that get incentives to support. They get pay incentives to support. We have 3 of those. One of them is responsible for the slip, trip, and falls. One is responsible for the community CPR, and the other one is for engagements into the community. And so that takes care of that. We put a lot of responsibility on our companies to go out and do that. And then we have our Navigator resource program that takes care of the behavioral health, the homeless issues, and then the health issues. And that's a staff of 3 individuals, or now 2. We had one just recently resign and move on to another job. So they are responsible for that. The CRR himself he outlines the program in conjunction with the deputy chief of support services. And then what I'm tasked with doing is any of the organization as far as the operational intervention, scheduling that out for him. So it's split between operations, the 3 individuals that we have there, we call support personnel, and then the PRN program, or the Pasco Resource Navigator program.
Thank you for that
Sure.
clarity.
Okay. Chief, would you please describe your management style and what techniques do you use?
So my management style is situational, transactional, and transitional. And everybody talks about servient leadership. Well, if we're in the fire service, we're servient leaders. So I look at it more to the situational, transactional, and transitional. And some of the ways I do is through managing or leading people, you have to look at them as individuals and you lead them in that perspective. How firefighter X might need to be led or managed is different than firefighter A, and so on like that. So you apply the situational leadership to that. As far as transactional, if we need to change gears or change processes, that's how I look at the transactional. And what we'll do is we'll implement process action teams and look at it from that perspective to give us an idea what the problem is, give us some solutions to the problem, and then implement the solutions to the problem. So and we use that for the transitional as well. And our transitional, how I manage off of that is usually the city of Pasco, since I've been there, has had a master plan, a strategic plan, and then we use annual operating plans, which is how we base our budget. And that's how we manage that way from those processes. And then what we do is we do an effective and efficiency process review. And in that, we look at, is it really doing what we're doing? And that comes back to the process action teams assist us with that, or the organizational support teams, however you want to look at it from that perspective. We put a lot of emphasis collectively across the organization into our employees, helping us with correcting problems, identifying problems, and then giving us solutions to the problems. A lot of our employees run projects. Our SCBA project is ran by the employees. It's not ran by me. And so basically my job is that in that case, I situationally manage them, which means basically they come to me with anything that they need. We budget it. Then I set the expectations every year for what we expect out of the SCBA committee, and they do that. I do the same thing with our hose and tools committee and so on like that.
Yep.
Sure.
Just a quick follow-up. How many grievances have you had in Pasco?
In Pasco,
You've been there, what, 3 years? 3 years?
Yeah, this year was the most we've had, and we have 3 of them right now. And that's last year we had 1, and the year before that we had 0.
And given the style that you're describing, which sounds pretty progressive, why did they occur?
Part of it occurred because of the transition to a new chief. One of it occurred because of there's a difference in our contract. There's a difference in agreement of the language of the contract, and we couldn't come to at the fire chief level. We couldn't come to an agreement, so it had to be raised to the second level, which was the city manager level, and so that's where it's at this point. But those grievances, most of our grievances are resolved at the fire chief level, or even at my level. One of the grievances was because we moved, and actually it was me. I moved this individual, or we were moving people from stations because of operational needs. And what happened was I gave the battalion chief the okay to do that, but he never gave the employee their 30-day notification. And that's what our contract required. So I ended up moving the employee back, going through the 30-day notification, and then we moved them. So it was as simple as that.
What, Carrie, you at liberty to talk about the one that wasn't resolved at the fire
Yeah,
chief level?
So that's dealing with health benefits is what it is. There's an interpretation difference of our contract of health benefits, and it's being held at the city level. The contract states that the city will pay full health benefits. The city doesn't interpret it that way, that there's some leniency in there. So that's where it's at that level to deal with. That's why it was beyond our level to resolve.
Thank you.
Sure.
I got one, Mr. Chair. The budgetary process for the district is a whole lot different than much.
Yes, sir.
You don't have a bunch of bean counters, City Hall. We only have a guy, and he's not a bean counter, but he's a good manager and what have you, and with vision and what have you. How do you see you working that type of?
Well, it doesn't matter if it's city or district. We have auditor requirements that we have to maintain and follow through the state. So the idea is that we are stewards of the residents or the taxpayers' dollars. So it's my job in conjunction with the financial manager to make sure that the board has those processes in place of managing, developing, and executing that budget correctly. I'm very familiar with the bars codes and so on like that. That's no different between the district and the city. The biggest difference is that where I have in the city, I have my own, my budget has our own accountant, and then above her, we have a supervisory accountant that we work with. And there's layers above that to include who finalizes, the city manager authorizes what we will submit to council for budget. In some respects, it's I think going to be easier because what we're doing is we're taking out at the district level some of the bureaucracy. It's more straightforward and more either we have the money or we don't have the money type of concept. And I think that's a lot easier than what we have in the city in some respects. So I don't see any problem with that. Budget is nothing new to me. I've managed the federal budget. I manage the state budget, city budget, and if selected, I'll manage a fire district budget. It's just being in accordance with what you as a governing body have set and what the state auditor says we have to do.
Being a city department, how does the thing with the state auditor work? They come in and audit the city, and then you're just part of that? Or come in and do a separate audit, fire?
No, they come in and audit the city. They look at every particular part of the budget. And then we have to account, case in point, if we have something that doesn't look right to the auditor, we have to justify why we did that. We have to present the justification, the reason, and the rationality behind why we executed the dollars in that way. And 2 years ago, I sat with our finance department, myself, the chief, and the other deputy, justifying some of our expenditures. And some of our expenditures came around training dollars and so on like that. And to be more specific, it came about spending resident and taxpayer money on food for the training and so on like that. And it came down to our contract states that if they miss lunch, we have to pay the firefighters and so on like that. So that's what it comes down to. A lot of times, this past year's audit, we got some questions sent to us via email. We answered them via email. They sent that to the auditor, and the auditor was acceptable for it. But we go pretty much every year, we're asked questions on our auditing and so on like that. The difference being, Commissioner, is that there's a middleman between us and the auditor, where here you're actively invited I shouldn't say invited, you're actively integrated with the audit as opposed to in the city. It goes back to that level of bureaucracy.
I see.
Chief, just to follow up on Kate's question, in terms of the difference with a city, of course, the city has a lot more diverse revenue resources.
Yes, sir.
Get no sales tax.
Right.
Could you talk about what you perceived challenges generally in terms of revenues being less diverse, more limited for a fire district in this state, and what you know about our particular district and its.
Sure. So let's start with, can I work backwards? I'll start with the district. Most of your revenue comes from your assessment fees, which right now it was 135, I think, per 1,000. You just got it registered up to 150, but you're limited based on the capacity of the city as far as build out and so on like that for assessment fees. So you're very limited. You have some options. You can go to a utility fee if you're looking at that as opposed to a standard assessment fee. Additionally, is that where we have the ability to impact fees, put fees in for code enforcement purposes and stuff like that. The district could do that. It's just, how do you do it? And you have to facilitate that through the two cities and the areas we do. My concern would be is that, and eventually it's going to be that way in Pasco too. There's going to be a point where you're at capacity for growth. And in that capacity, that also limits revenue as far as on assessed value, especially when you start getting into moderate to low income housing and so on like that, that impacts everything. So we have to be collectively at all levels, and more and so in the district, you have to be good stewards and you have to be forethought and strategically thinking. Hence, that would be looking at truly, do we impact, you can implement impact fees. What is the potential growth for that impact fee? What can you resolve for that? One of the other things is fire utility fees. What we've done in the city, a little bit different, but we can bleed it over into here, is we have an ambulance utility fee. We did a per bed charge in our hotels and so on like that. So instead of saying that the hotel pay $5,000 hypothetically, and I'm off on that, well, we went in and said at 75, you're usually 75% full of your total capacity. We're going to tax you based on that 75% of the utility fee. And we looked at that across the board at everything from our hotels, our motels. We looked at even some of our, we're looking right now, I should say, at some of our extended care facilities for our aging population and stuff along that lines. So there's opportunities for us to do that. It's the biggest problem that everybody's dealing with is that 1% cap. And we have to look at, do we get active as far as with our legislative folks to start pressing our legislators to increase that tax based on sustainability? When inflation's at 8% and we're at 1%, it's not sustainable. So part of the job, if selected, is going out and looking for methods to increase revenue. And unfortunately, we are a service that the people expect. We are an expensive service. There's no getting around it. When fire engines are costing $1 million a piece, when labor costs are going up, and it's not it's because inflation's going up, labor costs are going to go up. People have to survive. People have to understand holistically that you either want a level of service or you don't. And you tell us through the funding options you give us if you want that service or not. So real quick, Commissioner, just to sum up, part of the job, if selected, is going out looking for other revenue methods and formats.
Any other follow-ups? Is there anything else you'd like to add at this point?
If selected, I'm the type of individual that I'm very task-oriented, very focused. I believe in roadmaps, so I am a firm believer in strategic plan, master plans, standards of covered documents. I'm also a firm believer in an annual operating plan. So if we build a budget, we build that budget to an annual operating plan, which means you as the governing body and the policymakers will know, yeah, I've approved this budget and I know exactly what it's going to be spent on. 80% of the budget, 80 to 85, almost 90 in some cases is labor. So that's a given, you know that. But there's other opportunities out there. What about what programs and so on we're going to spend it on, what equipment? So I believe that training, what training are we going to do to meet that as well? As an individual, as a leader, I believe in developing our future and current officers. I believe officer development doesn't start when they're promoted to an officer. I believe it starts when they become a senior firefighter and are eligible to become a leader or an officer. So that's some things that, if selected, I'll bring to the table as well.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
See you this afternoon.
Yes, sir.